congressional candidate, and that's Shri Kulkarni. He's a candidate for U.S. Congress District 22 in Fort Bend. And I think I see Shri there. Shri, would you go ahead and take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, and I will handle a few questions, and we'll give you a minute at the end to wrap up, similar to Seema.
All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you to everybody on this call. I see so many friends, people who have helped us along the way in this campaign, this entire way through, and especially to people who have broken barriers to lead that way for us. People like Gordon Kwan, Alice Chen, who I block walked with, and I'm so proud to see her in office, and all the other candidates here, including the ones who have helped me, such as Seema, such as Kathy. I'm so honored to be here with you all here today, because when I was growing up, there weren't these faces. There weren't people to look up to who are Asian Americans as a city council member, as a member of Congress, or maybe even a vice president. I grew up the son of an Indian immigrant. We started out life in a 2-bedroom apartment with 9 people in it. And the things that we valued were the same things that our community values: education. I literally bussed across town 15 miles to get better education growing up. We value science, and we know that the kind of flooding that we would experience year after year here, where we lost our car, my brother and sister almost lost our lives. We know that climate change is not a Chinese hoax, as our president says, but it's actual science, and there's evidence behind it. I experienced gun violence. I witnessed it personally with my father and my mother, where I had to hit the ground because people opened fire right in front of us. And we know that we want our children to be able to go to school without the stress of worrying about violence erupting. And of course, we believe in health. So many of the people from our community are on the front lines dealing with coronavirus. But even when I was a teenager, when I was 18 years old and my father got sick with cancer, I came home to help take care of him with my family. I did his IVs and his physical therapy, took him back and forth to MD Anderson. And when he passed away when I was 19 years old, my family was on the point of bankruptcy. We were taking donations just to stay afloat. And I don't think that any family should have to go through that, what we went through at that time. In my case, I worked my way through school, helped raise my younger siblings, went on to Harvard for my graduate school. I served in the US Senate as a foreign policy and defense advisor, but most of my career was overseas in places like Taiwan, Iraq, Israel, Russia. And I would have been serving overseas right now in India, if not for what I've seen happen in this country. The attacks on different ethnic communities, whether it's the African American, the Latino, the Muslim community, the Chinese community, all of us right now, we deserve a country that stands up for our values, and we deserve a government that represents all of us. And after the Charlottesville Nazi rally, I decided I could not continue to serve in this government. The most patriotic thing to do when your values are being threatened is to fight for them. So I resigned, I came back home. And what I found is that we have a large and a vibrant, growing community here. The Asian American population is the fastest growing population in the state of Texas. And we have the largest population, almost 100,000 Asian American voters here in District 22. But what I was told was, don't bother with the Asian community because they don't vote. And the easiest way to lose an election is to talk to people who don't vote. And we said the easiest way to never get change is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I speak 6 languages from my time overseas. We recruited people from every one of the major communities. So we are now campaigning in Chinese, in Vietnamese, in Tagalog, in Hindi, in Urdu, in Gujarati, in Malayalam, and Bengali. We're campaigning in 27 different languages right now. No campaign in Texas or American history has ever done that, because we are striving to be the most inclusive campaign ever. That is the answer, the antidote to all of this bigotry and this hatred that we've been talking about, the threats to an Asian family that got attacked in Midland, or the threats to the Indian or the Chinese community in Dallas that we've seen recently, the kind of things that are stoked by a president who does not respond to science, but instead responds to xenophobia, trying to blame certain communities, saying things like Kung Flu virus or China virus in order to blame others, to find a scapegoat for our problems. The truth is we need to come together to solve our problems. We are facing the biggest challenge ever in our lives right now. And the only way we're going to do it is by uniting, not dividing. So in our campaign, by bringing more people out, we got almost 30,000 new people to come out who hadn't voted for president in 2018. We almost flipped this district. And then since then, we have registered 63,000 new people in our district alone. Our community, the Asian community, we can be the margin of victory, not just for District 22, but for the entire state of Texas, which would change the course of history in the United States, because this is our moment. We need to stand up for the health of our families. We need to stand up for education for all those children who can't go to school because we have not have a science-based strategy. And we need to stand up for our economy, for all the small business owners who've gone out of business this year because we don't have proper testing. We don't have proper PPE. We have people like my opponent who says that wearing a mask is communist and un-American. No, wearing a mask is the most patriotic thing to do. It means that we care about our community. We care about our fellow citizens. And if we believe in science, if we believe that every community has an equal voice, should have a seat at the table in democracy, and if we believe in our democratic institutions, like last year when our immigrants were being threatened, 100,000 people in Texas were threatened with being taken off the voting roll simply because they weren't citizens 20 years ago, which is not a rule or a law. If we believe that we have the right to vote and it should not be taken away, whether it's the right to vote by mail, our voting hours, our voting locations, or even the machines in the post office, which are being dismantled right now to prevent us from voting, then my friends, we must fight for that right. We must fight for our democracy. We must fight for the future, for our children, for our education, for our small businesses, our economy, and we must fight for our very lives right now because everything depends on us and we have the power to change this in 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you, Sri. First question, you've been criticized for being a extreme liberal, and then for advocating for Medicare for all. Would you kind of elaborate on what your actual position is on this and educate us?
Absolutely. So this is an example of the kind of political attacks that you get. So our position is actually that we should support the ACA. We should expand the ACA, that people with private insurance should be able to keep their insurance, but it is in direct contrast to our opponent who supports taking away the ACA. There's a lawsuit right now that would strike down the ACA. It's going to be heard the week after the election. And what that means is that millions of people will lose their health care. People who have pre-existing conditions like heart disease, like diabetes, like coronavirus, where we have the second most number of cases in the entire country here in Texas. All of those people have pre-existing conditions. And I am glad that our opponent has brought up healthcare because our opponent has not talked about healthcare for the last 3 years. It's the #1 issue that we have talked about. It's the reason why we are endorsed not only by the American Hospital Association, by Physicians Association, by American Nurse Association, because we believe healthcare is the #1 priority, and we are going to stand up for the health of our families.
Okay, good. Another issue that's important on the Asian Americans, a lot of Asian Americans own small businesses, as you know, and then they are severely hurt because of the pandemic. If you are elected, what would you do to help the small businesses and the immigrants communities to get back on their feet?
Sure, absolutely. And so the first thing is we have to have rapid testing. In addition to PPE and wearing masks, if we have testing that comes back in 7 to 10 days, you don't know if you're infected and you don't know if you're able to go back to work. So the kind of testing we have in hospitals, we need it everywhere that comes back in a few hours. But once we get past the pandemic, we need to also make sure we have targeted relief to those industries and those sectors that have hit the hardest, such as hospitality. We are hotel and motel owners in our community, such as food service. We own restaurants in our community. And we also need to make sure that those small businesses, especially those sole proprietorships that need that help the most, that have had to go through so much red tape. I talk to banks every day who say, for these people who've gotten loans of $150,000 for their sole proprietorship, they don't need all the red tape. They need loan forgiveness now. And then on top of that, once we get past the pandemic, we need to provide targeted relief loans as well as startup tax credits so that people can scale up and we can get back to normal again, because that's what we've all been waiting for.
Okay, good. And in the as you're aware, of course, there have been an increase of anti-Asian incidents because of the pandemic. And what would you do as a congressman to see if we could bring all the factions together to work together instead of the polarizing faction that we are now as a country?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, this attitude of trying to blame a scapegoat, and it doesn't matter whether it's the Asian community or the Latino community or the African-American community, I think this is a threat to all of us, and we need to stand together. And so first, that means calling it out, recognizing that these hate crimes are increasing. It means actually reaching out and including other communities, not just talking to them, but listening to them. That's why we're campaigning in 27 different languages. That's why we're doing outreach to all of these faith communities. And it means actually getting representation. because there are two parties here, but the two parties in Texas do not have equal representation. If you look at the Democratic Party here, it looks like this Zoom right here. It looks like our communities. It looks like the beautiful diversity of Texas 22 and the state of Texas. On the other side, it does not. They do not give us a seat at the table. For example, my opponent, half of our county is African-American, Hispanic, or South Asian. He has zero African-Americans, zero Hispanics, zero South Asians on his leadership team in the sheriff's office. And that's going to change when I'm representing this district, because we are going to make sure that we have people from every community represented, because every community deserves a voice. And that's how we push back this wave of hatred, anger, and division that is spreading across this country, not with more anger, but with more inclusion.
Thank you very much. Want to just take a minute to give us your closing remarks.
So we know that this is the most important election of our lifetimes. We are facing the pandemic of 1918. We are facing the unemployment levels of the 1930s, and we are facing the struggle for racial equality of the 1960s, all at the same time. But we also know that our community can be the difference. We are the fastest growing community here in Texas 22. We have the largest Asian American population in Texas. We are 1/5 of the population here. We can be that margin that will change history, but only if we show up and vote. And if you all out there are already planning to vote, make sure you bring other people with you. Come and join us. Go to our website at www.sri2020.com, SRI2020.com/action. You can join one of our phone banks. Every single day we are campaigning in any one of those 27 languages. We are going to have early voting days. I see Hyunja there. We are going to have an early Korean American voting day, an early Chinese American voting day, Pakistani, Indian, Bangladeshi. For all of our communities, we want to make sure that the entire community feels safe, that they can come out and vote, and they feel proud to come out and vote, because it is our community that is not going to sit on the margins anymore, but we will be the margin of victory. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good luck.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye-bye. 再见.
Thank you so much for our candidates. And I know we all know this is the last weekend before the earlier voting start on Tuesday. So it's wonderful to have them here speak to us.